Well, I hate to stop all of this fantastic conversation, but our roundtable discussions have come to an end. So if you want to grab a couple more stickers for your passport, do so pretty quickly. We're going to take a 15-minute break. I am going to, after I step off the stage, I am going to go out to where you got your name badges. And if you have a full passport, go ahead and hand those to me. Remember to put your name at the top, because if your name's not there, I can't give you all the cool stuff if you win the raffle. So make sure your name's up there. And please, for those of you at the roundtables who have led, thank you again. This has been a really cool opportunity to learn about all of the pretty amazing things that are going on at the university and in the community. And we would invite all of our roundtable leaders also to stay or to drop back in at any time during the day for any of the panels or the keynote that you might be interested in. So let's give our roundtable discussion leaders a round of applause. Not only for what they did today, but for what they do every day for our students, our faculty, and our staff. So thanks, everyone. Please get food, relax a little bit. Bathrooms are just out this hallway under the exit sign, and we will be back at 3:30 for panel number 1. So Well, we're going to go ahead and get started with our first panel. And our first panel is entitled Supporting Inclusive Communities, Understanding and Navigate. Oh, excuse me. That's our second panel. That is incorrect. I'm so sorry. Our first panel is Mona Hearn is going to tell you the title of our first panel because I do not have it in front of me right now. So good thing I have Mona on my team. So our panelists today, Mona Hearn will introduce our panelists today, but are an esteemed group of colleagues and community members from Pocatello, our K-12 school district, and also our ISU faculty and staff. And so we're very excited to have them here to kick off our first conversation about how we really support inclusive communities and belonging, equity, and inclusion in our educational context. Mona Hearn, who is our field experience coordinator in our Kent Center for Student Success, is going to serve as the moderator for our panels and introduce our panelists. I do want to let you all know that we have, so good to see lots of people here in person. We also have a YouTube live link that is happening. So we have several of our conference participants who are not able to make it here in person. So we are on YouTube live as well. So that's about as close to fame as I'll ever get. So that's fantastic. So Mona, come on forward and we'll start our panels.
The size difference. Well, welcome everyone to the first panel of this year's BEI conference. This panel will focus on how to build inclusive communities and will offer strategies on how to foster a strong sense of belonging in educational and professional settings. Our group of panelists bring a wonderfully diverse range of experiences to this discussion, and I'm pleased to introduce them to you. So I will introduce them one by one. So after I introduce them, if they can come and join us on the panel. I would like to start with Dr. Mona Zhu, who is a professor of experimental psychology at Idaho State University, having joined the faculty in 2013. Her exceptional teaching and mentoring have garnered numerous awards, including recognition from the Psychology Graduate Students Association and incredible research recognitions, such as Rising Star designation from the Association for Psychological Science. Dr. Zhu served as the Director of Experimental Training and Psychology for several years. Known for her incredibly supportive nature, she's a strong advocate for the well-being of her students and colleagues. Please help me welcome Dr. Zhu. Next, we have Ms. Raina Patterson, who serves as the Federal Programs Coordinator for the Pocatello-Chubbuck School District, bringing over 20 years of elementary teaching experience to her role. In her current position, Raina advocates for undeserved populations, collaborating with Title I interventionists, community resource workers, multilingual learning teams, the Bannock Youth Foundation, the Juvenile Justice System, and so on. Working with these incredible organizations has provided Raina with a deeper understanding of the challenges faced by many populations in our communities. Thank you, Raina. Here at ISU, we are beyond thrilled to have Ms. Effie Hernandez as our Native American Student Service Coordinator. Her previous roles include Assistant Director of Recruitment at the University of Idaho and Multicultural Director at the College of Eastern Idaho, where she organized many cultural events to foster community engagement. She recently played an incredibly important role in organizing the highly anticipated and successful annual Indigenous Peoples Day here at ISU. We are so incredibly proud of the work that she did with that event. And in her free time, Effie enjoys spending time with her family, working on beading projects, and connecting with her tribal community. Thank you for being here today. And last but not least, we have Mr. Corey Magnum, who is an author, Pocatello City Council member, and businessman. He is passionate about developing leaders and helping others unlock their full potential. His newly published book, Faith Over Failure, unlocks the full, really redefines failure through the lens of faith. Corey founded Uncommon Youth International, a nonprofit organization aimed at inspiring young people to experience transformative change. Recognized with the Idaho Business Review's 2023 Accomplished Under 40 Award, he is also a proud father with family being his greatest motivation. Thank you for being here, Corey. Well, I'm really excited. These incredible panelists bring a range of experiences to this panel, and thank you again for being here today. So we have a series of questions, and we would like Corey to start us with the first question, and then others can join in with other, thoughts. So how do you personally, this is the first question, how do you personally define the concept of belonging, and what's significant does it hold for you?
So first, I want to say thank you for having me here at this panel discussion, and I think this is a great opportunity. For the sense of belonging, I believe that it's a really deep-seated connection with the people around us and social groups, physical places. It gives us a deep-seated root to who we are, and it gives us an identity to lock into our surrounding areas too. I grew up in Arco, Idaho, and being the only person who looked like me in my class, it was really important for me to feel as if I belonged to this community and to these people. And so I think that it's important that we do everything that we can to make people feel connected or feel included and to feel seen within our communities.
I don't know if I can follow that. No. No, I definitely agree with Corey. I think it is a sense of connection and acceptance. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. It's about the contributions that you bring to the table that matters. And I think a lot of us have a story that's very unique in who we are. And I think that's important to hear that story. And again, it brings a sense of belonging in that matter. And I also feel that, and I can't speak for everybody, but I think it also allows people to express themselves without fear or judgment. And I think that's very important because, again, when people feel like they belong and they feel like their voices are being heard and they're feeling that they're mattered, I think it can help with engagement with the community, with the ISU community. And I think it helps us to build leadership skills. I think it helps us to take risks, and I think it helps us to just show support. And I think that really stands out with your personally and professionally.
I think I'm going to echo the panelists here, but I define belonging as the same. It's that sense of connection, those strong connections that you create. And when I think about this, I think I always look through an educator's lens, and I think that those strong connections and relationships that you build with your students in your classroom, in your building, in your district, those are really the foundations for learning. And I think about how connections and relationships are really where learning starts, because that lays the groundwork for everything else. That's how we have kids, coming to school. That's how we approach attendance. That's how we approach engagement. That's how you get high achievement levels. And so I think without that connection, you don't have a sense of belonging, and everything else kind of relies on that piece. So absolutely, it's so important from an educator's point of view, but even from an adult, I didn't grow up in this community either, and I had lived in Tacoma, Seattle area. And so moving here, I even experienced a sense of, not belonging. And it took me a while to, I guess, you find your people. But, I think about that and I draw on that for my students. I'm speaking the predominant language here, and, and I think about how my students, I share a similar culture with Pocatello, but having students that might come in and not share those things and how that feeling would be so much more intense. And so I think when, as educators and as community members, like really working on the connections and relationships we have with those around us and with our students is so crucial.
So agree with all of that. And I think I'll just add, so, that feeling of connection, of being accepted, of being valued can be really important for students, for staff, for faculty, for anyone in the community, because then it allows you to show up as your genuine self, and you're not spending a lot of time and energy worrying about, do I fit in? Are people really seeing me for who I am? Do I have to worry about safety? Do I have to worry about all these other things? And that makes it much easier to thrive. And also much more likely to think, what, if I belong here, maybe I want to stay here. Maybe I want to continue these relationships and these connections.
When we look at connectivity, there's a lot of children and people who have behavioral issues. And a lot of times when people aren't feeling connected, it results or it manifests itself in a behavioral way. And so a lot of backlash or outlash or attack because I don't feel as if I connect. And so a lot of times there's this, and even the idea of peacocking. So I have to put on the brightest, loudest face and the brightest, loudest personality so that people accept me or people start to gravitate towards me. But oftentimes we find that rejects people also. And so I think that the more that we do to try to make people feel included, we curb some of that behavioral issue and then even to the element of crime within certain communities, because people don't feel connected or they feel marginalized. It pushes them to a situation where these behaviors start to exist.
I think sorry. And I think to add to that, I think code switching plays a huge part in that too. A lot of us do that. And I personally feel that because being a lighter skinned Native American, so having to play kind of different traits there of not only being Native American, but I'm also a student. I'm also, an advocate. I'm also all these other things. So having to code switch in those communities can also be a challenge, and finding your sense of belonging and your identity in that way too.
Being one of the only, so going to school in Arco, Idaho, I'm the first Black person to graduate from Butte County High School. When I first moved there, I came from Washington State, and my dad one day stopped me and says, "Son, that's not going to work here. My personality, the way I carried myself, the look." And so it leans to the code switching. And so he says, "That's not going to work here." And I'm like, this is who I am. Like, what are you talking about? And the more that I interacted with people, the more that I started to realize this ain't going to work here. And so I had to really morph into who I am. I am grateful for that experience because it created a more rounded individual who I am today. But also when I walk into certain arenas, even as a city council member, there is an element, I feel, of code switching sometimes. And the way that I might be perceived by a certain group of people isn't the same as what I'm perceived by another group of people. And so that feeling of being included or belonging is really strong because I don't want to have to switch who I am depending on who I'm around or where I'm at or what business forum I'm in. And a lot of African Americans, even in this community, I know feel that same way. And my relationship with Fort Hall, I know that there's a lot of that out there too. And so we've got, and it's not just our cultures or our people, but I know that there are those kind of things going on.
I feel like I have to address, coming from K-12, the sense of belonging and the division that social media creates with our students. And, I think social media initially creates a sense of false belonging and something that we're really trying to address because that backlash of isolation and exclusion that comes from it immediately, almost immediately and follows them all day long, I think is really crucial. And I know a lot of districts around us are addressing this issue as well. But something that the Pocatello-Chubbuck School District is looking at very closely as far as re-engaging students and building those connections and students of reporting themselves that they feel more connected and engaged and closer to their peers and their teachers when they don't have a device in their hands all day long. They're not getting those constant, notifications and distractions all day. So I think that's something really important to look at too, as far as connection.
I want to thank all of you for being very honest about this concept of code switching, because it is something that minorities have to do, and it takes a heavy load, and I don't think a lot of people recognize that you walk through life and you constantly have to think about your audience and who am I talking to? And so thank you for addressing that. This kind of leads us to our next questions, and that is, what are the key components that contribute to a sense of belonging and foster inclusivity in classrooms and professional settings? Now, what are some of those key success things that we can do to create a sense of belonging? And also, how do educators and leaders effectively incorporate these components into their daily praxis? Reina, do you mind starting us off on that?
Absolutely not. So I think when we're talking about the components that contribute to a sense of belonging, I still go back to that connection and the foundation that you build in your classroom with that climate and culture. And it really does start at a granular level with the teacher and the students in a single classroom, but the leadership from the top down really does matter as well. But I think spending a lot of years in the classroom, one of the things that I always tried to do is just really try to approach my class with that culturally responsive lens, where you spend time. I mean, we all spend time as educators getting to know our students, but when you have a diverse classroom, you need to put a little more research into truly getting to know your students and knowing their authentic selves. And I think that makes such a difference when you have a student that comes in your classroom that may not speak your language, being able to just learn some phrases in their language, to have some visual representations where they can identify, I think is so important. And really just getting to know them as human beings. And I think that's one of the things that maybe we need a little bit more work on, is realizing that these humans come to you with a whole life of experiences, that sometimes those experiences are a different religion, a different culture, oftentimes some trauma, lapses in instruction. And so I think really just getting to know that they have had this whole life before you, and really trying to understand that. And then bringing that into your classroom, making those connections with your students, and really striving to make peer-to-peer connections and student-teacher connections. And I think that one of the things we do really well at K-12, and we pull on restorative practices for this, is morning meetings. And I think that's a place where you can really get your students to connect with one another. It's a non-academic meeting where your students are together. And you can use it for a lot of reasons. We use it for teaching self-regulation skills, some breathing exercises or yoga poses, things that can help students regulate themselves throughout the day, but it also can just be a chance to ask a question to get to know you. And then you start to see the connections between students, and then you're drawing on those connections as you teach throughout the day and kind of weaving that into your instruction. And I think that's the most important piece, is you're drawing on those things that make them feel comfortable and successful, and putting that into your instruction. I think that's really important. Another thing I think we do well at secondary, well, we're growing, but we trying to have student clubs that every student can see themselves in, can identify with. Students often start these clubs themselves. And so I think that's a really important piece, because that just contributes to that outside of school, that social belonging that's extra curricular. And so I think really the practices of putting energy into getting to know your students and families is probably one of the most important pieces of instruction.
Yeah, just echoing that, I think really trying to get to know folks, but with this understanding that we're humans first, right? We're fallible. We have a multitude of identities within us, and that should be the first and foremost thing. And it's rather than you could think of education as just this transactional, like you're in my class and you're expected to do these things, and I'm the font of all knowledge, and what I say goes. But hopefully it's a space where when I mess up, I would love it if a student shared with me, or like, actually you said something today that like really bugged me, right? And ideally could even stop in the middle of the class to be like, okay, let's address this right now, right? We're all learning and approaching each other and with respectful curiosity rather than assumptions. There's additional barriers or challenges for things like, asynchronous online classes where you never get to meet people face to face or never interact with them at the same time. So there's additional things you might want to do to, check in through email or have forums where people can post. I always, introduce myself and share pictures of my dog, and that usually is helpful to kind of break the ice and start getting to know folks. And you can make deep connections even if you never meet people face to face, or if it's just never even through Zoom or something like that. Yeah, I'll stop there and let others talk.
Wow. What a gentleman. Thank you. So just echoing off of both these ladies here, I think also representation matters. So celebrating all the successes or even acknowledging the failures. And I think that's what's really effective. And that's something that I truly value, is that helps me feel supported not only in this position that I'm in, but that also helps me support the students. So celebrating those small things can mean a big difference and make an impact for anyone that we're trying to serve in the institution or even out in our communities. They got an A on a test, perfect, let's celebrate it. Or they learned how to do another hobby, let's celebrate that. So again, making sure that they are feeling supported, that they are feeling that they are valued in that way. I also think that, I'm going to say the D word, diversity does play a huge role in making sure that we are valuing the different diverse perspectives. We all have different ways of knowing. I have Indigenous knowledge as well as my Western knowledge. So those sometimes blend well together, but sometimes they do not. So how do we help achieve growth in those two forms, but also, again, what's the common goal in making sure that we're feeling represented and what we're feeling is valued? And that can really help making sure that, again, we are feeling supported for who we're serving.
Thank you. I echo all the sentiments that were just offered here. I also add that I think it's important to lead with grace, because not everybody is at the same level. And so be patient also with people as they're developing or trying to disseminate into the culture or the classroom or the business. Collaboration is another huge component there. When we have people from different backgrounds or different ethnic groups working together, what I have will rub off on you, what you have may rub off on me. And so now there's a sense that we belong together. And then coaching. I believe that's important for teachers, business members, just parents, for us to coach. And coaching isn't me just shouting at my kid to go run the play, but I have to teach them how to do the play correctly. In football, I'm coaching my kid on how to run a route. You're going to run 10 yards and then slant in. And I have to teach them how to stop, break down their hips, and then pivot. And if I don't teach them that, I can't demand that they do that and execute at a high level if I have not properly demonstrated and coached them to operate at that level. And so I think that coaching is a huge role. It plays a huge role in the sense of belonging.
I just wanted to add that as educators, community members, how important it is to model the behavior that we want to see. And as teachers, really modeling for our students what it looks like to have an accepting classroom, how we're all family, how, like we treat each other with respect, and also how you respond to that behavior when maybe you don't see it. I think being that role model for students, that it's a learning experience to go through some of these situations and how to respond when you do see that behavior, so that we really are encouraging the kind of things that we want to see as adults in our youth as well. And I think us as role models, and, not everybody is in the same place as an adult, and being that role model. So I think for us to really recognize that we need to kind of show exactly what we're wanting to see in our own community is important.
Sorry, I think Raina made a really good point. As being one of the only kids or the only Black kid in my classroom, there were things that were said or done to me that were racially motivated. And it hurt to see my teacher go along with the status quo or to not at that moment address whatever was said or whatever happened. But instead, I had friends in the classroom who would stand up and attack whatever the situation was or address it. And I had friends multiple times. I went to go address it and they'd push me back and say, no, 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 no. We're going to fight this fight if ever this happens. But I never had an adult or a teacher who would flat out stand up and just say, that is not acceptable in our classroom because this person belongs. And so what she was saying, I think is really paramount to the sense of belonging that we as adults model that exact behavior that we want to see in our society.
Yeah, all so great. I think one way that I find really helpful to think about it, someone posed this question to me at one point, and it was really helpful. How would someone know you're inclusive? How would someone know you're an ally if you never said those words, right? What are you actually doing that's showing up? And it helps shift it away from, am I using the right words? Am I doing the performative thing? And what is the actual actions? And recognizing it can be really challenging, especially when it's challenging the status quo, right? Sometimes we get into this assumption that the status quo is somehow neutral, and that is not the case. And so, we have to like make sure everyone's comfortable, but really thinking about, power structures and who is being harmed, right? If we intervene, and then also recognizing when we don't, and feeling bad about that, as we should, but not to just, beat ourselves up about it, but okay, how will I learn from this? What work do I need to do so that I don't freeze the next time that happens? Do I have friends who can help me, role play and get me comfortable in interrupting? Or, I didn't handle that well. How can I handle that better in the future? I also wanted to follow up on the representation comment you made, which I think is incredibly important. And then also recognizing that, all of us contain so many different identities. Some of them are very obvious to others, and some of them are concealable. And so being respectful too about, especially our classrooms as hopefully a space where people can feel safe expressing and showing all their identities, but recognizing that's not always the case. And so, if a student shares an identity that's concealable about ability or gender or sexuality or neurodivergence or anything like that, being respectful about who else knows about this, protecting that. And then also thinking beyond sort of the individual level of, what is going on at the cultural level, at the social level, at the legislative level that makes it so that not everyone feels safe showing their true selves in all aspects, and then working on that as well. But, first and foremost by voting, right? But there are many other things you can do.
To add to that, I think we need to recognize that one of the highest levels of discrimination is to remain silent when we see that someone is going through something. And sometimes we remain silent because we don't want to make the situation worse. But at the same time, we don't protect the person who is at the receiving end of that discrimination. I feel oftentimes people don't even hear when someone is being discriminated against because they don't come from that background. So again, going back to training, how do we train our educators so they can see discrimination when it happens, and how do they respond to it? Because again, one of the highest levels of discrimination is to remain silent during those times and not providing that feedback. So going on with that, coming to the next question, what are some effective strategies for identifying students or employees who may be experiencing feelings of exclusion? And how should educators and leaders intervene to provide support? Mona, do you mind starting us off with that comment?
Sure. So I think it depends a little bit on how much interaction you have with folks. I think you're at an advantage because you probably see your students very often. It's a little trickier if you never see them, but obviously looking for any signs of, disengagement, they're not they're not showing up, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're not responding to you. Those kinds of things are always things to be on the lookout for. If you do have interactions with them more frequently, though, you can look for subtler cues or even just proactively just check in with folks so you kind of get ahead of it before it reaches a point where it's like, oh, they've been missing for a month. Like, what's going on? In terms of strategies to address that, so those at ISU, there's a whole team of folks who work on exactly this issue. And we have a new Navigate system now where if a student in your class, you're concerned about them for any number of reasons, right? There's a variety. It could be academic. It could be kind of, oh, they said something that, made me think there might be some stuff going on. You can alert that team and it'll get all the different resources on campus kind of involved that are needed to kind of check in with them if needed. Of course, you can check in as well individually, but the nice thing of involving teams is they can see patterns, right? Is this something that's happening across different classes? They might have additional information about what's going on in their life or other things like that. And then providing support. And if you're able to build strong relationships, one of the nice things is making those connections to support. So I think, for me, one of the biggest wins is if I'm chatting with a student and they're having a rough time and we're able to reach a mutual understanding of here's a path forward that would be helpful. And then maybe, okay, let's say we agreed on counseling might be a good next step. Would you be comfortable us calling the counseling department right now together and having that warm handoff of setting up an appointment or something like that?
I think just to add on to that, in K-12, I think now we're at the stage where we are really good at implementing systems that we have a lot of measures for academically, right? But one area that I think we've evolved is not just looking at students like their responses to intervention or academic support, but really looking at this multi-tiered system of support. And that really includes social, emotional, academic, attendance, behavior. And so kind of getting a full, more holistic view of the child. And when you see some signs of isolation or disengagement, there's really targeted strategies that you can use. And I have more experience at the elementary level, so I'll just speak to that. But we really kind of tried to compile a full picture of the child and try to really see where we can intervene and maybe where that targeted area is, maybe that root cause of where the disengagement comes from. And so one of the strategies that we use at the elementary, and I know secondary uses this as well, is to implement a 2x10, which is an adult building a relationship with a student for 2 minutes every day for 10 days in a row. And it's a non-academic conversation. You find a time to meet with the child and really just trying to build a relationship with them so that they have an adult to go to, because that we know that one positive relationship with an adult for a child can really significantly change their life in the course of their happiness and their engagement in education. And so I think we just being more intentional about how we intervene. And sometimes I think even at elementary, we forget to ask the child, listening is so important. And as adults as well, just really being open and listening to what could be an issue. I think sometimes we don't, like you said, there may be something that may be offensive or uncomfortable that somebody overlooked. But if we have that culture of being able to hear each other and to really openly have a dialogue and discuss, what could be uncomfortable or what could be an issue that I want to change in myself, I want to be able to have that relationship with adults around me, and especially with children being able to hear, from their point of view.
So I'm going to take a different approach. I think everything that has been said is important, but also we need to learn how to navigate conversations if we are checking in with a student, if they are not comfortable with that. Sometimes they can have a defense mechanism of thinking, oh, I must be doing something wrong if they're asking me if I'm okay, how our class is going. A simple conversation can sometimes alter someone's perception of, I'm not doing okay. I don't want you to know that I'm not doing okay. Or there could be so many different things. And so we need, as educators, to learn how to navigate those pathways to make sure, okay, so how can I properly engage in conversation if a student isn't interpreting differently than what I'm asking, because what I can be asking them can be a simple question, but how they might interpret it is, okay, no. So that's also something that I'm learning right now in my current role, is just making sure that I can approach the students how I need to be when they are wanting to be engageful and they're wanting to connect. And so again, everything is valid. And I think also reassuring them that their feelings are valid. And that, I mean, I'm not going to say how old I am, but it took me a long time to really understand that, because the way I feel about things is, it's important. And so it's really important to make sure I'm letting my students know that what they're feeling is important and it is valued. And again, let's have a conversation when you are ready, when you are comfortable sharing your story, and I'm going to be there to listen.
Just so you know, Effie's 22. Yesterday was her birthday. 21. I apologize. She's 21. Happy birthday. I think that there are great strategies. For example, I like what was said. I think creating touch points, frequent touch points is really heavy. If you don't have a relationship with someone, or you don't know how to connect to that person, it's hard, like Effie's saying, to have those conversations, because now it does build up a wall. But if you have a legitimate relationship with this person and they know that your heart is for them, it makes it easier for them to open up and to share however they're feeling or share their perspectives. I believe that's also, we have to watch when we have those relationships with people, it's easier to watch behavioral changes. I know you, we know each other, and so you're acting just a little bit different, or this was just a little bit off. And so now I can speak to what I'm seeing, and they'll receive it better when I have that connection with the person. Without that connection, it's almost impossible to address certain matters.
So from what you're sharing, to create that safe environment, we have to start with connecting with the students. It starts with connection. Excellent. Could you please share any examples of case studies or any specific programs that you have seen that have significantly enhanced inclusivity and a sense of belonging in schools and communities? Reina?
Yes, I'm so excited to share this because we have 3 of our English language learner team members here today. And one of the examples that I wanted to share with everyone was one of the changes we made this year with our secondary students. It was sort of born out of necessity because geographically, Pocatello is very spread out. We have 22 schools. We also maybe don't have the numbers of students that we're seeing in Twin Falls and West Ada and Boise and things like that. So our teachers, we have 3 teachers, and it was very difficult to provide services to all the students that we are getting, our newcomers coming in. And so this year we decided that we would pull students to kind of create a little community of students. And so we're pulling our high school students to PV Tech, which they get to be part of this awesome technical school community. And see some of the other programs that are there. And it's really been amazing to watch these teachers and their students kind of create a community there, and to kind of foster that sense of, we have this group here, and they may not have ever run into each other because they're from different schools. And so I think kind of creating that sense of belonging there at PV Tech has been really great. We also are doing this similar program with our middle schoolers at Hawthorne Middle School. So they come together and receive instruction, and just kind of watching some of the lessons and some of the programs that our teachers have been doing with the kids have been great. I know one of our middle school teacher, Miss Barlow, is having their students do interviews this week, interviewing the principal, interviewing the SRO, and these are our students that are first year language, learning English for the first year. And so it's pretty amazing to see that program grow, and we're pretty excited about it.
I'll share from the research side of things. There have been studies on social belonging interventions. And so that is the idea for within education, where students who are new to an environment engage with narratives of previous students around the topic of belonging. So either they're reading accounts or maybe watching a video of someone who shares, when I first got to the school, I didn't really know if I fit in and I was having some challenges. And here's, how what I did to kind of find my people. And then over time it got better. And so this is helpful in kind of reducing the sense of if I don't feel like I fit in, there's something wrong with me, right? Normalizing. Everyone always feels excluded at some point in their life. And usually if it's a new situation where you don't know anyone, probably don't feel like you fit in yet because you don't know the culture or how your role is in that group. And then also reassurance of this is something that's temporary and can pass. The one big caveat for this research is it is not effective and it's actually harmful if you do that in a situation where the type of exclusion that people experience is not normal and or it's something that is not going to be temporary. So this is where especially systemic things and policy stuff really needs to line up. So you can't just sort of say like, come here, we're super inclusive. And then if that's really not true, that kind of intervention will really backfire. So it really should be something that is just sort of a low level temporary normal kind of thing rather than a nope, people here are going to be discriminatory or these are systemic issues where accessibility or other things are just not going to happen. So addressing those kind of big issues as well.
I think just having a lot of those resource opportunities on campus accessible for anybody who's needing it. I think, again, I'm going to say the D word, having those diversity resource centers really matter to a lot of the community members that we are serving, students or those out in the community. I think just from my personal experience, having connections built with peer mentor programs. So starting out earlier on, I didn't know I was going to go to college until I was involved with a Native American program for the summer for 6 weeks. And so building those connections earlier on and seeing people who look like me doing the things that are really fun and exciting in an institutional level was really great to see because, again, I'm seeing people who look like me doing research. I see them doing so many amazing things. And so that's something that I'm really excited to be sharing here to incorporate with Idaho State University and just working with so many different departments who have a common goal, and that is to work up what really matters when it comes to sense of belonging for the communities that we're serving, especially the Native American population. We're 15 minutes away from Fort Hall Indian Reservation. So knowing the history, and we're not going to get too much into that, but acknowledging the history, but how can we move forward to show that success, to share those stories, and to work with other departments who do want to collaborate, but maybe just didn't know how or didn't know what questions to ask. And so being able to do that now in this role, working with so many individuals who are passionate and who do want to learn, who do want to be educated, can really help foresee that. And helping them feel welcome too. I know we're talking about students in a lot of these conversations, but it's also about supporting our faculty and staff and community partners to bring them to campus and to say this is a place where you belong as well, and vice versa. We also belong in that capacity. So it's all about making sure we're taking care of everyone that we're trying to serve.
I think everything that was said is fantastic. Working in a bank, we implemented a D word, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative in the bank. And I enjoy it, but I also don't. And the reason why is because as being an African-American person or person of color or just diverse, I guess, I'm so sorry. I don't like feeling pandered to. Don't do something for me just because it checks a box. Don't do something for me just because it fits, because I'm the black guy in the room or whatever. I absolutely abhor that. Like it is the most awful feeling. If I'm not qualified, don't give it to me. If I'm not good enough, don't give it to me. If I didn't earn it, don't give it to me. And so I feel like we have to be really careful when we initiate these kind of programs that we're doing it out of the heart of actual care for people and the actual care for inclusion, the actual care for diversity and equity. It stems from a lot of the civil rights movement and things of that nature. My dad grew up in a segregated school system his entire life. My mom also. My grandparents on one side of my family came out of slavery. We have pictures and what stories of people being lynched and all kinds of other horrific things that we've all heard about. But the pendulum to swing the opposite way to where you're just handing out things to me just because I feel it. I appreciate it. I'm probably not going to turn it away, but that was a joke and I apologize. But distasteful. But I do feel like we have to be intentional about how we do it. It can't just be a fluff word or a fluff program or a fluff system. We actually have to be intentional about how we do it. And we actually have to make people feel as if they're welcome and wanted, not that because you fit this box, this is why we're bringing you into the fold.
You know, thank you for bringing that up, because I know in a lot of conversations with our students, when we talk about involving more diverse literature or, you know, diverse materials in our classrooms, I often say this, and they know it. I say, please don't have a charity mentality. The charity mentality is like, oh, I see one minority student in the classroom, so for the sake of that student, we're going to do this. That's a charity mentality, instead of coming from a place that, you know what, that student probably already knows about their culture. And by us teaching about, you know, various backgrounds, we are actually benefiting all students, you know? So I think getting away from that is really important. Yeah.
I do want to say on the flip side of that, and just being in public education, there is a movement, I think, to reduce some of our literature and our curriculum that does allow students to identify with that instruction. And so I hear what you're saying, but I also see that it could have a negative effect on our students, that when they're in class and they're learning, they may not see themselves in the instruction or the curriculum. So I think it is important to be involved, to vote, and to make sure that we do show representation in our instruction. And, you know, like you said, it's not a fluff program, but we want all students to feel like they can see themselves in how we're teaching and presenting instruction.
Thank you. We come to our last question, and I want to leave some room for our audience to ask questions too. So we have only a few minutes for this one. And Effie, if you could start us with this. How can educational institutions engage families and communities in promoting a sense of belonging for students, particularly those from diverse backgrounds?
So when reading this question, when it was first sent out, automatically it's be present. We need to be there to listen first and then have a conversation. And that's sometimes hard for me to say, because with the work that I do, we tend to have a lot of the conversations and we don't follow up and we don't act. And that is still something that we're still trying to continue to fight, especially when it comes with Indigenous education, is that we have these amazing conversations, but again, there's nothing that follows up. No one wants to take that step further. And I can't say for everything, but there's some things, again, that when I've been in higher ed for almost 10 years, and it's still just, what's that pivot point? When can we get it to move on? So we need to be present. We need to take the time to be involved in those communities that we're serving to get a better understanding of what they are trying to advocate for. And that's how we learn to be better advocates, is if we take the time to want to learn from that and to be open-minded. And again, give them the opportunity to share their story, because we all have one. And that's what's really unique about us, is that we all come from different backgrounds. We all come from different places of learning and growth. And again, that's how we build ourselves up to be better leaders in our community. So being present, let's just not have the conversation, let's act on it. And again, celebrate all the successes that we're all doing. Students, faculty, staff, community members, let's celebrate all the wins that we are doing right now as people. Because we're not statistics, we're more than that. Again, we're people first. And so let's celebrate all that we can do together to move forward and to continue the work that we're doing.
Anyone else on the panel?
Well, if no one's going to take the mic, I think there's two simple things. Number one is to ask. Ask, hey, parents, what can we do to make you and your children feel included or feel like you belong? What can the school do to assist in this or whatever the case is? But once they tell you what you can do, act. Ask, then act. Don't ask just to make me feel good. Ask and then take some action toward whatever it is what I told you. And it might not be 100% every time, but at least show the consistency that we're going to move toward making you and your family feel more included here in our school system or in the business or within the community.
Well, everyone, now we come to questions. Are there any audience questions? Can I have one? And while I go around, Mona, go ahead. Do you have a comment? Oh, okay.
Sure, I
Alright.
can talk before we get to the other question.
We can hear you.
Okay, but it's fine. Oh, there we go. So my question is for Raina. So I am in the Boise School District. And so you were mentioning that you pull all of your MLs to go to the schools. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, and it's obviously not the model that we want to have. We know that having collaboration in the schools with our ML teachers is the best model, but we just are not there yet as a district with funding and those sources. So what we're doing is trying to pull them as a community. So they're being pulled with all the kids that go to the technical school. So there's buses that run to the technical school for all the programs. So every technical program that runs during the day, and they are a part of that. And so they receive their language instruction there for an hour, and then they work on credits that they need. But they also get a chance to kind of meet the teachers that are there and be a part of that community. And the goal for when I collaborated with the principal of the technical school is to have them then go into some of those technical programs and be a part of that because they're already comfortable in that space, and to kind of move them into a program where maybe they want to explore something. Like we have a student that's really excited about culinary arts now. And so, some of those opportunities that maybe they might not have seen before.
Okay, so thank you for explaining that more. So Boise had something similar to that. And then this last year we got rid of it, which is really unfortunate. And so I guess my follow-up question is, I was talking with one of the science teachers in my school yesterday at lunch, and she was asking about, do students that have accessibility to sports or any extracurriculars? Is that something that, because that's another piece of belonging too with those students. Have you run into any issues with that?
No, and I think there's pros and cons to both models. And I know the model in your school district, and I think it just takes time to build that collaboration piece between both the content teachers and the language teachers. So the program that we run, it already is an established system for busing in the district. So all the kids get on before 4th hour, and then they all get bused back to their schools at the end of the day so that they can catch their bus home or they can participate in sports. And we do have a lot of kiddos that are in soccer, on different in football. And so it hasn't interfered so far, and it is a brand new program, and we are like feeling all the growing pains right now.
Yeah.
But so far it's been really positive, I think. So
Because I think that's like exactly what the teacher that I was talking to is like, that's what, like the model that you have, that's what we need in our district, is so that way students can get bused back to their home schools to have that accessibility piece.
yeah, I
So-
just met with some other districts too, and I think Jefferson School District might be moving to this model as well. And really, like I said, it's dependent on your community and your schools and your needs, because we were receiving so many newcomers in the last couple of years, and I'm fairly new to this position, but looking at the data, we had maybe 1 to 7 newcomers in the 5 years before I started this position. And I think last year we had by January, 30, 40, somewhere around there. So, and of course our kids are moving in and out, but it just really helped us to accommodate those needs and to kind of, when they come into our schools, they're just absorbed into our program and we know where to start with them. And it's been great so far. Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It does sound weird. You all mentioned to not be silent and to respond when you see forms of discrimination. I guess in my mind, that could be as simple as stereotypes playing out or microaggressions or blatant discrimination. I'm just curious how you would recommend for us to respond in those situations.
Can I respond to that? And you guys, this happened to me where I was in a situation at work where some, in my opinion, discriminatory comments were made by a couple of colleagues. And it took me by shock, and I was standing there, and some people had that shock face and they didn't say anything about it, to the point where I had just to remove myself from that space. And one of my colleagues, and was the only one who did that, they came to my office and they checked on me. And all they said, I just saw what happened and I just want to make sure you're okay. So I understand that sometimes, wanting to address something in that moment might not feel appropriate, but oftentimes that silence keeps us away to checking on the person who might have felt very discriminated in that moment. So that, thinking about it, that meant the world to me, that one of my colleagues recognized it, saw it, heard it, and came to make sure that I was okay.
That's a great question. I think that you have to be really careful on how you address those kind of things, mainly because, and let's take it from the perspective of like children. I had one of my sons called a really nasty N-word at school here not too long ago. And the way that I would suggest handling that would be to handle it with grace, because that kid is basing what they're saying off of what they've learned at home and and all that they know. And so to shift the paradigm is not for me to attack that child, but to coach them into why this is negative or how they could have better approached this person. Now, if it's an adult who knows better, we can be a little more stern towards that. And I feel that people who are in authority should also have a responsibility to address some of these issues too, because the silence of the authority gives an acquiescence to that behavior. And so I think there's multiple ways, but we really have to be strategic in how we approach these situations.
And I would just like to add on to that, we have to be careful because this can happen within our communities and it can happen outside, right? So I think just, and it's okay to check up on the person, but also if they're comfortable, you can ask, like, how would you help me? Like, please educate me on how I can do better next time. I had something similar happen to me actually when I started here at ISU. I had someone say, "Oh, you're too white to be Native. I look too white." And it's just like, well, my response was, well, that's why I'm here. I'm here to help educate that not all of us look the very stereotypical Native, right? So, and it was an innocent comment, but again, how do we carefully shift that narrative to say, well, it's okay. Like, let's have a conversation about it. And telling them my story gave them like a little bit of like, oh, okay, perfect. So sometimes it's just not knowing, but it's okay to ask. And again, please be mindful and maybe check the surroundings that you're in. And it's okay to have a private conversation. And if they're okay and comfortable to share.
Yeah, and I was trying to pull it up real quick, but I can't find it. But Daryl Wing-Sue and colleagues have an article out about micro interventions. So how you respond to microaggressions, and they have a lovely table that if you email me, I can send it to you. That has sort of different responses you can give, and of course it's kind of tricky, kind of feeling out like, is this a safe situation where I can really confront this, or is it more I'm going to check with the person and kind of support them? Is it safe to record if it's something that we want documentation for? So safety is of course first and foremost, and there's different ways of approaching it, but the main message is if you can interrupt it in the moment and stop that, that's really helpful. And it could be as simple as something like just saying ouch, right? And I think that's helpful because sometimes when something happens, you get shocked and it's hard to come up with the exact, this is why this is, and just to say, ooh, that was rough, or hey, I don't agree with that, or, oh, you might not. And if you feel it's safe to kind of really address it and be like, you might not recognize that what you just said can be really offensive. And then also to Mona's point, recognizing, who is responding, right? And that dynamic. So, for me, I think oftentimes I kind of let things slide when I probably shouldn't for a lot of reasons, being a people pleaser and it's safer and all sorts of things. And so I really appreciate it when I don't have to step in, especially if there's, relationships or dynamics at play. So, for example, my partner is white. And at one point early on, there was a very much older generation person in the family who made a comment and used a Asian racial slur. And I was kind of like, ooh, I'm just meeting this family member for the first time. What do I do? And he was very nice in that moment to be like, I got this. Or like just kind of look at me, didn't say I got this, but he turned around and was like, hey, we don't use that word anymore. And like he had a conversation with them and it didn't happen again, right? That was really helpful because it would have been a lot tougher for me to try to navigate like, hey, I just met you, but let me correct your language. So thinking of opportunities we have to, if it's going to cost me less than the other person to speak up, to try to speak up more.
I just want to add one thing, and I think Pocatello has a unique community that sort of, like you said, the norm is neutrality and sometimes silence. And coming from Tacoma, the things that are said here would have an absolute immediate reaction. And, it's sort of that social, where you get checked socially in other places, but coming here, so I was, and I've been here for over 10 years now, but being surprised by the comments that are allowed. And so I think I really do believe, and I raised my children this way, and they're probably way too outspoken at this point, but not allowing the silence to really like be the person that speaks up because other people want to speak up and sometimes feel that they can't. So I think that's just a personal experience. I don't have research to back that up, but I think that's very important.
Well, thank you so much, panelists, for your time and for this really elevated and insightful conversation today. I appreciate you deepening our understanding on how to strengthen a sense of belonging in our educational and professional settings. And thank you to the audience for joining us for this panel discussion. We're now going to take a 15-minute break until our next panel starts. So please join us back at 4:45. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with our second panel. I hope everybody had a chance to grab something to eat and drink. We've got some coffee back there, so that's always good at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Our second panel is going to be focused on supporting inclusive communities, understanding and navigating legal issues belonging to equity and inclusion in educational contexts. And I'm really excited to introduce our panelists that we have today. We have an expert group of panelists who can help us understand, learn how to navigate, and apply some of the legal and legislative bills that have come down the pipeline and are coming down the pipeline to make sure that we can enhance student success. So today I'm going to introduce each one of our panelists. And if you all, when I introduce you, if you want to come on forward, we'll go ahead and get started after everybody's on the stage. So first, I'd like to introduce Stacy Gibson. Stacy serves as the director for the Office of Equity and Inclusion at Idaho State University. Stacy brings a wealth of professional experience to the table, and today we'll be providing a broad overview of national trends related to belonging, equity, and inclusion in educational settings. So Stacy, thanks for being with us today. Next, we have Karina Mason-Roras. Karina serves as the Director of Disability Services at Idaho State University. Karina is a true expert in disability services and also in her ability to support our students. I've worked very closely with Karina on a number of different issues and have been very grateful for her guidance and her support. Karina today will be working in conjunction with one of our other panelists, Jill Radford, who I'll introduce just in a moment, by providing more information for everybody here about Title II and ADA language and policies in educational settings. So Karina, thank you for joining us today. Next, I'm excited to introduce Ian Parker. Ian serves as the coordinator of Title IX and Title VI at Idaho State University. We're really lucky to have Ian here to discuss current and relevant changes specifically to Title IX for faculty and teachers who lead in our educational settings. So Ian, thank you for being with us this afternoon. Our fourth panelist is Jill Radford. Jill is a clinical instructor in the Deaf Education Program at Idaho State University, and we're very excited to have Jill with us. And Jill is going to be working with Karina today to provide us more information about Title II and ADA language and policies. Jill, if you'll please join us on stage. And last but certainly not least, we are honored and I'm very excited to have Senator James Ruchti with us this afternoon. Senator Ruchti is an owner of Ruchti and Beck Law Offices and was elected to the Idaho State Senate, in 2022. Senator Ruchti is presently the Assistant Minority Leader and serves on the Judicial and Rules Committee, the Commerce Committee, and the State Affairs Committee. Today, Senator Ruchti will be providing information on statewide legislative bills and actions and how teachers, faculty, and administrators can include those in our educational practices. So Senator Ruchti, thank you for joining us this afternoon. So we are going to get started with our first question for the panel. Sort of a big question, a big general question. What are the current legal changes that P20 faculty and administrators need to be aware of? So what's the landscape? And Stacy, if we could start with you, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm so pleased to be at this conference, specifically focusing on rural education. I am a product of rural education. I'm from a very small town, and I know that rural educators often are the heartbeat of their whole community. So thank you very much for being with us today. I don't think that we have enough time to talk about all of the current legal changes that have happened over the past several years, but I'm going to hit the highlights of some of the trends that we're seeing nationally that impact both K-12 and higher education. So first of all, I think it's important for you as educators to understand the governance structure of what laws the U.S. Department of Education has oversight over. So I want to start there. And the one that we all know about is Title IX. That's been really prevalent over the past 15 years or so. And Ian's our expert on that. But one that is emerging that we're seeing a lot of movement around lately is Title VI. And that is Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights has released a lot of guidance lately about that. And just since 2023, there have been 6 new Title VI guidance documents issued. So as you recall, that covers race, color, and national origin. This renewed interest in that and the guidance that we're seeing specifically is covering anti-Semitism and Islamophobia that we are seeing a rise in nationally, and that's happening in K-12 education as well. The fact sheets and the guidance that has come out from there, that's available to everyone. I would recommend that you go to their website and look at those documents and see what's been happening there. What we've seen, as we saw with Title IX in 2011, is an expansion of the definition. So under the categories of citizenship, residency, and actual or perceived shared ancestry, there now has folded religion in to some of the Title VI protections, even though it's not specifically stated. And so what the Department of Ed is telling us through these enforcement actions is that we need to take stronger steps in education to resolve these complaints when they're coming up. There's been 2 new resolutions just recently within the last year. One is the Red Clay Consolidated School District Resolution, and the other one, which you may have heard about since it's close to us, is the Park City School District. In the Red Clay situation, there was a student who was subjected to anti-Semitic harassment, hostile environment. What they found is the district failed to address repeat offenders. There was inadequate record keeping. They did an audit of past reports, and they failed to do a climate assessment. In the Park City district, there was ongoing harassment based on race, national origin, and disability. So many protected classes at play there. There was a failure to investigate, a failure to remediate, and documentation issues as well. What that means for you in your school districts are that if a school knows or should know about harassment, they must take prompt and effective steps to stop the harassment, eliminate the effects of the harassment, and prevent it from reoccurring. This requires an evaluation of not just the situation, but an evaluation of the conduct to decide if there's a hostile environment for students in that environment. And that's based on a totality of circumstances. And that also can, somebody in the previous panel brought up social media, that can move into online conduct or off-campus conduct if it's relevant to what's happening on campus and the effect. So what's important for you to know as educators is that the U.S. Department of Education is really taking a strong look at harassment based on race, color, and national origin. And what that means for you, if you are an administrator in a school district, is that it's important for you to be aware of this, first of all, and for your school district to have a plan in place for when these things happen. A thing that we do here that I think is really helpful is whenever some resolution agreements come out, we will take those and we will use those as like a tabletop exercise. So what would we do? What would you do as a 3rd grade teacher if you heard of something happening like this? What would happen within your classroom? What would happen within your district? And then you can begin to play out the prompt effective response that you should have. So that's a ton of information. But you should know that there is increased scrutiny on school districts for how they are addressing these types of complaints and behaviors.
My turn?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. Some of the current legal changes that under the Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, it has expanded. The most recent change has been in regards to electronic accessibility. So this can be a huge undertaking, but the key component of that is that we need to ensure that all of our electronic systems are accessible. So for an example, websites or our learning management systems. And so that crosses into our K through 12 systems and our higher ed systems. We need to ensure that our videos are captioned, documents that are on the websites, for an example, are accessible. And again, it's just can be a huge undertaking, but something that we need to do. Not only is it the right thing to do, but we are legally required to do so.
Some of the legal changes from my perspective from the Title IX world. This year we saw the release of the final rule, the 2024 final rule for Title IX. That rule sought to expand protections for people and students based on sexual orientation, gender identity, sought to define more clearly what is considered a pregnant or parenting student and how we are supposed to support those individuals with respect to discrimination and harassment. Not soon after that was released, and I'm sure most of you already know, there was a flurry of lawsuits that went through, and Idaho, as well as 25 other states, are currently enjoined from enforcing any of those regulations. So now we're kind of in a pickle. Where are we? Where do we stand, right? So that's the landscape from the Title IX world. We have a new rule. We have an injunction. We have the old rule, and we have competing priorities as far as federal and state law and how we're supposed to navigate those. So the difficulty is really, how are you going to move forward as educators? How are you going to protect students? How are you going to make sure that you're in compliance with the law? And what law are you going to choose to be in compliance with, right? So, I mean, if you choose one, you're going to possibly lose funding from one entity, and if you choose the other, then you'll lose funding from the other entity, right? And all the while students are in the balance, and we have to consider those things.
All right, want to make sure this is on? No?
Testing.
Did that work? Oh, that one works. Typically, I would be using my preferred sign language as a way to communicate with you, but because I'm looking out and I'm seeing there aren't a lot of deaf people represented, I'm going to use my voice. But it's on YouTube, so I want that to be clear of why I am not using ASL and representing my community using our first language. Regarding the question, my recent experience with the law that has impacted the deaf community the most this past year was a lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court for Perez versus Sturgis. And in that lawsuit, an adult deaf individual sued the former school district who had graduated him with a normal high school diploma. However, his skills did not represent normal high school skills. And when he attempted to get a job and gain employment, he could not, because he didn't have the appropriate skills or accommodations during his school years under IDEA. And the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Perez And so a lot of school districts needs to be aware that that is possible, that they can be sued, not under IDEA, but under Americans with Disabilities Act for the services that they fail to provide during their education in pre-K through 12. So I think that was an important case just for you all to be aware of. And I'll explain more of the implications of what that means in the next question.
So I was in the legislature from 2006 to 10, and then my wife Wendy and our kids were young, and so I decided and the economy had tubed, and so I had to go make money. So I left the legislature, and we raised kids, got them through college, and I went back in 2020 to the House, and then 2022 to the Senate. When I got ready to come back, I had people tell me, you know, James, you're not going to recognize the place. It is so different than it was just 15 years ago. And it was. And we are really making educators' lives difficult, both at the university level and at K through 12 level. There is no denying that. There is, people ask me all the time to explain it, what's happening. The best I can do is tell you that there is a healthy strain, unhealthy strain of Christian nationalism that is influencing our politics. It's really kind of, North Idaho on down to the Treasure Valley now and moving into the Twin Falls area. That culture is influencing politics, influencing who gets elected. And those legislators show up with a certain agenda. And you can see it if you just go look at the legislation, the policy areas that we focus on when it comes to education. There's lots of bills about bathrooms. There's lots of bills about DEI, lots of bills about the LGBTQ community. The list goes on and on and on. This year, there were a couple of bills that I think everybody's probably heard about, but the pronoun bill, ostensibly, it was designed to ensure that teachers didn't have to use the pronouns of the child or a name that the child wanted to have used. In other words, you can't force a public employee, a teacher, to use that name if it's different than what their gender is. But it went beyond that. It was, you can't even use it, even if that's the child's choice, and the teacher or the educator wants to use the pronoun or the name, but you haven't gotten permission from the parent. So they've really put school districts in an awkward position. And as my wife always tells me, all we want to do is teach the kids. If they want to be called something different, we're happy to do it. We just want them to focus and learn. In addition, there was another bill, the parental consent for medical bill. We knew, some of us knew that was going to be a disaster, and we pointed it out. And frankly, when we were focused on the bill in committee, it was a committee I was in, we weren't even thinking about school districts. We were just focused on medical professionals and, kids going to get medical treatment. But pretty quickly we figured out that it was going to be a problem for school districts because it's a bill that requires you to get the permission of a parent before medical treatment is provided. The problem, and we see this again and again in the Idaho legislature, our bills are drafted so sloppily that they have unintended consequences. So when you read, for example, that parental consent bill for medical treatment, the definition of medical treatment is so broad that it very literally would apply to giving a kid a Band-Aid. And that's why school districts, that's why the name colloquially was used for the bill. Parental or parents aren't very well defined because it doesn't say anything about step parents and their role in this. And we do this again and again in our legislation. And it's because there's an agenda to accomplish. It's usually a bill that's been written by what we refer to as Bill Mills, which is, one of these think tanks, so-called think tanks, and they produce legislation and then they try to get it passed in as many states as they can. So when the local legislator shows up with that bill, they don't want to hear that they need to do something different with the language, because frankly, I don't even think they truly understand what their own bill says. And they don't understand it well enough to know what a proposed change would do, so they just don't want to change it. And oftentimes it gets forced through that way. We've really screwed you. And I wish I could say we'll fix it next year, but I don't see things changing. I see there being more challenges. Just know there are a lot of legislators over there who see the problem and are trying to do right by you. But it's going to take a lot of work and a lot more time.
Well, I'd like to thank our panelists for each of you could have taken, perhaps 5 hours to talk about all of the things that you just briefly summarized. So thanks for providing that overview and sort of helping us be proactive in what may be coming down the pipeline coming up. So our second question is, how do these legal changes impact the following groups: students, faculty, and staff? And Ian, if I could start with you.
Okay, so with respect to Title IX, how do these changes impact students, faculty, and staff? It's going to be uncertain. There's a lot of uncertainty out there, right? So students who belong to those groups that are protected under 2024 rules, but not specifically named under 2020 rules, and seeing how things are happening in the media, in the news, and how we respond as administrators, professionals, and educators, they're going to be confused. Who do I go to? If somebody's bullying me or harassing me based on my sexual orientation, how do I get help? If I tell my teacher, will they have to tell my parent? And so on, right? So uncertainty as to how they're supposed to find remedy for their issues. Now with faculty, it's the same, right? So students are going to come to you and they're going to ask you for assistance to some degree. And what are you allowed to do? What is going to expose your institution to liability? What is going to continue harm for the students? What is it's tricky, right? And again, same for staff. So that's we don't know what the answers are. 2020 rules under Title IX say one thing. They're pretty clear, and we've been working on them for a while. 2024 rules add some things to that. Again, there's confusion. Bostock v. Clayton was affirmed by the DOJ to be part of Title IX, and the new rules say something different. I mean, the new rules affirm that as well, but then the challenges and the injunctions say something different. So where do we stand at any given moment? And trying to figure that out is a complicated puzzle that we try to figure out one day at a time. And hopefully we get a solution one of these days that makes some sense.
I would say one of the advantages here at the university is that we don't ever have to figure these things out by ourselves. So we have a team of people who meet regularly, and when these situations come up, as they frequently do, we consult with our legal experts, we consult with our academic experts, and our student affairs experts. So we are always concerned about the person first, and then we make the decisions in accordance with the best interpretation of the law at the time that we do that. I think that this should be the same response in your school districts. You as the teachers should never have to bear the burden on your own about what to do in a particular situation. So the purpose of these laws at the federal level is to ensure equal access to education. The purpose of the disability laws, the Title IX laws, the Title VI laws, and these legal changes are intended to protect all students. And so I think that when you look at this, you look at it from that value perspective. How are we protecting the students and particularly the students that are harmed in accordance that is lawful. So the impact of faculty and staff. I think that there's some kind of initial questions that you should ask. First of all, who is responsible within your district or your school for compliance with these federal laws? Who's your Title IX coordinator? Who's your Title VI coordinator? So right off the jump, I would suggest figuring out who is responsible for that. And maybe it's you. And if it's you, just to kind of digress a little bit, we had a Title IX training years ago here at ISU. I think this is pre-2020 regs. And I had a room full of K-12 people who just found out that they were the Title IX coordinator for their school. And many of them were coaches or in athletics and didn't understand the responsibilities for the sex-based discrimination and harassment challenges as well. So as a first step, I think you go back and you talk in your next staff meeting about who is the person here that's responsible and identify that person. I think the next thing you do is look to your policies. What is your harassment policy? And who's responsible for updating that? Do you know how that policy works? Do you know what needs to be reported and to whom it needs to be reported to? How do complaints come in? What is the difference within your school between a bullying complaint and a harassment complaint? Often the two are the same. Are you handling this through your conduct process when you should handle it through a harassment discrimination framework? How do you keep documentation? If you didn't document it, it didn't happen. I will defer to the lawyer in the room, but when you have a conversation with a student or you have a conversation with someone who's saying they're being bullied or harassed, how are you documenting that? How are you escalating that within your school? Who's responsible for the investigation? Do they have training? Do you have someone there who knows what to do in an investigative process? So I think these are just some basic kind of questions that you can take back with you and begin to have conversations. And again, I would look to, pull up the Park City OCR resolution agreement, look at the fact pattern there and run through a tabletop exercise. What would I do if this was reported to me? How would I address this? Do we have the procedures in place to do that? And if the answer is no, as it often is, this is a training tool we use here all the time, then how do we strengthen that? How do we give teachers the tools that they need? I will tell you here, we have a mandatory reporting policy. And so when anyone who's an instructor receives a complaint of harassment discrimination, they are supposed to call Ian or me. And that shifts the burden away from you as the teacher who's trying to manage your classroom and, just get enough money for tissue and whatnot to who's the responsible person, who should that report go to? So I'm not saying these things to scare you, but I'm saying these things to help you and perhaps take back some information and some tools that can be helpful to you. Doing nothing is never the right answer. Handing it over to law enforcement and doing nothing is never the right answer. So even if you hand things over to law enforcement, as we frequently do in cases of domestic violence or sexual assault, we still have an obligation to see those things through on our end from a civil rights perspective. So look to the published guidance, keep yourself updated on what's going on, and go back and ask questions about what do we do? And is that the right thing to do?
Well, great job. Okay, so I wanted to start out by saying Jill in her earlier comments actually brought up some really good points or made a good point when it comes to disability law. We really need to understand all applicable laws because there is more than one. So we have we have those that would oversee like the K through 12 system. So you're looking at the IDEA. We have 504, the Rehabilitation Act, which is a federal law. Those of us that receive federal funding need to abide by that. We have Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act that covers public sector. And then we even have some state laws too. And in the example that she gave, it was a perfect example of maybe somebody paying attention to maybe just compliance with one law, but not other laws. So it is important to dig deeper and kind of understand the nuances of each of those. As far as how the legal changes impact the following groups, such as students, faculty, and staff, and even our institutions. When it comes to the expansion of the Title II with electronic accessibility, it can negatively impact those we serve if we're not, again, creating or delivering information in accessible formats. And that's can be a huge problem. And not only just legally, but people should be able to obtain the information they need to be successful and to learn in our learning environments. When we move over to institutions, these are unfunded mandates, and there are many lawsuits over the years, because even prior to the expansion of Title II and the language with regards to electronic accessibility, 504, the Rehab Act already had some language or some guidance, or 508 of the Rehab Act already had some guidance there. And it has resulted in many lawsuits and complaints and settlement agreements that are costing institutions millions of dollars as well. So it could, if we're not working towards compliance and ensuring that our systems are accessible, again, there's a huge cost associated with that.
Thank you. I'm getting nervous. Okay. I want to make sure I'm not talking too loud. All good? So in addition to what Karina was saying about IDEA and ADA needing to be complied with in both school settings and pre-K through 12th grade and post-secondary education settings. That was hearing aid feedback, sorry. The implications it has for students in the pre-K through 12th grade settings for the Perez versus Sturgis, it was to make sure that teachers were aware of the needs that the students had and were documenting their progress appropriately on the IEPs or 504s or whatever accommodations plan that was in place. Because often teachers or school administrators would think they're providing the appropriate accommodation, but they forget to track progress. And when they forget to track that progress, they don't have documentation to provide evidence that they did make the appropriate accommodations to measure the students' annual progress. So with that law case, it really emphasized for educators, administrators, school districts to make sure that they were documenting all of the nuances to be in compliance with the law. And I really appreciated how Stacy said, try to interpret the laws with the best intent. Too often, students with disabilities are put where we're doing the minimum that we're required by law. And often that's not an appropriate accommodation. Students are often left feeling isolated because they don't have enough appropriate accommodations provided for them in their school settings. It happens in college setting as well. Often those students will come from the pre-K through 12th grade school settings with an education plan. They come to the college and like, so what do I do with this now? where do I go? And that's where Karina's office comes in. And it's really important for those students to know the types of services that are available at a university for them to be able to go in and say, I need these accommodations to be able to succeed in my educational environment. So those are just a couple of things I wanted to highlight. And I really appreciated that Stacy said that, to make sure that you're interpreting the law to the best intent of the law and not just the minimum accommodations that need to happen.
I would say, you know, when it comes to some of these state laws, the pronoun bill that we talked about, bathroom bills, library bills, parental consent before you provide medical treatment to your students. Stacy mentioned it, but it's important to make sure, one, that you're following whatever rules and procedures and policies that your district has set forth. They've had the attorneys take a look at the language of the bill, navigate it, figure out what is and is not allowed. And hopefully they've come up with some policies accordingly. And then, you know, document when you have interactions with parents, even when you think you've made a mistake. I will tell you, as a trial attorney, the times that people get themselves in trouble and make my job a lot of fun is when they try to hide something they've done, or they try to explain it away and justify it when there is no justification. It does not take long for an attorney to get from A to B on that. So when it comes to the law, when it comes to trying to follow the law, the reasonableness standard prevails. Even if that's not the standard in the specific statute you're talking about, try to do what a reasonable person would do. So when you are documenting what you did, think about it from that reasonable person standard. You know, I provided a Band-Aid to Sally on the playground after she hurt herself. And then afterwards, after I did that, I realized she doesn't have a parental consent form. Well, number one, don't hide it. Tell your supervisor what you did, document it, explain why you did it. Sally was inconsolable, and I am a person who cares about Sally and all children, and I wanted to help her, and I had a Band-Aid, so I gave her a Band-Aid. Even if it technically violates the law, sure sounds good to me. The problem we have, honestly, is some of the things we are now doing with these statutes just aren't really reasonable. They force people to behave in ways that they don't naturally do. I mean, whether we're talking about abortion laws and some of the laws we passed in that regard, or you know, the pronoun bills, the bathroom bills, the library bills. We've done such a poor job of drafting the language and establishing the standards that it requires people to not think normally, like they normally would, because they have to become and behave in a way that you just don't normally do. Anyway, it's a real problem for us. Let me mention one thing that's popping up in a lot of bills over the last 3 years. And it's almost always with some of these kind of social warfare issues. The legislators that draft these bills, or these bill mills that draft them, they put in what we call private causes of action in a meaning. Think about a library bill. If a student takes a library book home and it has material harmful to a child as defined under the statute, the parent can file a lawsuit against the school district for it, or if it came from the public library, against the public library. That's called a private cause of action. You don't have that in every statute, which is why they put it in specifically in this bill. I think there's a private cause of action, the pronoun bill. There's probably one in the bathroom bills. They're popping up everywhere. Private cause of action are not a new thing. In fact, they're actually a really good thing. If you think about, federal laws, discrimination laws, or the Idaho Human Rights Act, which is the state's version of our federal discrimination laws, there's a private cause of action in that. An individual who is discriminated against can bring a lawsuit. They don't have to wait for the Attorney General to do it. They can do it themselves. The Idaho Consumer Protection Act If somebody has violated the Idaho Consumer Protection Act and it has harmed me, I can file a lawsuit on my own behalf because of that. That's a private cause of action. Here's the difference. Normally, when we have put private cause of action in bills, it's because trouble has found us. Trouble has found us, and we are simply responding to it. And we're going to use the legal system and the laws that protect us. What we are now seeing in these bills is a pathway for people to seek trouble. Find library books that they deem harmful under the statute and sue the school district or sue the librarian. I'm having trouble with my child and we're really struggling and he thinks he's gay and he wants to use certain pronouns and I hate it. But a teacher used that pronoun. I'm going to go sue him. So it's a really weird thing we've done. And I don't want, educators to get overly worried about these private cause of action. I know that always makes educators nervous that they could be sued. And I used to get that question a lot. But my answer was always the same. It was, as long as you are trying to be reasonable and doing the best you can, you're going to be okay. And you just can't sweat that stuff. You got to be a teacher. You got to do your job. Just be reasonable and everything will be all right. Yeah, that's it.
Great. Thank you all very much. Lots of excellent insight. The next question is for Jill and Karina. So Jill, you started talking a little bit about the transition for K-12 students to higher education. And so curious about what are some effective strategies for identifying and supporting students who may be struggling to navigate that transition. So Jill, if I could start with you, and then maybe Karina, if you could jump in on the higher ed piece.
Testing. So part of the transition plan for students who are classified as eligible under IDEA to receive an IEP, they have a transition plan that starts at age 15. And in that transition plan at 15, they need to start developing a plan of where they want to go after they leave the education setting for K through 12. And in that transition plan, I think it's really important that you start a discussion about what do you feel you need to be successful when you leave our school. Even if they're going to college, if they're going to a trade school, if they're developing certification skills, you need to start the discussion early so they can learn how to start advocating for themselves and the things that they need when they leave the school system. You also make sure that they're a part of that process early on, 14 to 15 years old, so that they have the ability to say, oh, you know that 14 and 15-year-olds are not going to say anything, but they're in that setting with you as educators, administrators, parents, school personnel. They see you discussing, oh, I may need more than what I'm getting right now to make sure I can succeed in my college education or in my trade school or in my work situation. It's also important that they know that there are services available to them when they get to the post-secondary experience of learning. And that's where I'm going to have Karina to describe more. More of it is just have them involved in the process more frequently and not exclude them. Too often we speak for people who are experiencing learning differences or have different abilities or have neurodiversity. We speak for them. It's really important that we include them instead of speaking for them. Ask them what they feel their needs are. For a person like me, with my experience, as an employee of Idaho State University, as you notice, I have interpreters here, and I'm really grateful that I have that option here to be able to say, this is what I need for this setting. Even though I can speak for myself, I still have that access provided for me to be able to say, okay, I can fully participate in this type of event. And so I think that's important to acknowledge. That started early on for me to be able to recognize what my needs might be and how they need to be addressed. So, Karina.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. So on the higher ed side, one of effective strategy, and I think it was, in my opinion, probably inadvertent, is we have dual enrollment classes. And so those dual enrollment classes have really allowed the high school and the college or universities to actually partner when it comes to accommodations. And we end up with this unique opportunity at the higher ed level to be a little more involved in that student's transition as they come from the high school to the college setting. And I found that to be very highly successful when we can partner and work together and really understand what those students' needs are. We can also help with enhancing advocacy skills, so our students can grow and learn to, have their own voice and really participate within their accommodation process, even at the higher ed setting. In addition to that, Idaho State University, and actually I can speak on behalf of probably all of our colleges and universities within the state of Idaho. We do a lot of programming and really connecting with our high schools, special ed departments and the teachers there. And we end up developing or partnering in a lot of transition activities. So we're bringing their students to our campuses, introducing them to our offices, what services we provide, and just a wide array of transition activities. We also do that in partnership with the Idaho Division of Vocational Rehabilitation and the Idaho Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired as well. So again, those partnerships are key. And we feel like that exposure can to those students that are transitioning is highly beneficial and I feel like it really helps in them transition successfully. And then once they're at our universities, of course, we do rely on the IEP and 504 plans that have been developed in the high school to help us determine what some appropriate accommodations would be. And sometimes some of our students that are transitioning may need additional assistance. So a lot of our offices at our colleges and universities have developed other programs to provide support to help them to be successful. So for an example, at Idaho State University, we have developed an academic coaching program that's in partnership with our occupational therapy department and our counseling and rehabilitation counseling department, where we have their students under supervision provide support services for those that are transitioning and getting started at the college or university settings. And again, other universities and colleges across the state of Idaho have similar type programs available. Those aren't accommodations, but it is some additional support services that we can provide.
Thank you both very much. So our last question today, and Senator Ruckty, I'm going to lean on you to start in on this question, is sort of a call to action. How can we, all of us here and our colleagues and across the state and our institutions, become involved in and advocates for public policy and change? And tell me when you would like me to pull this up.
Oh, yeah, let's go ahead and
Yeah.
pull it up.
Okay. Sheldon's gonna come on board.
So there's only one way I know to affect change, and it's to get involved. It's to find out how processes work and then engage in those processes and figure out how you can influence those who are making decisions. And so when it comes to, how do we affect change? How do we improve our policies when it comes to DEI issues? That's the legislature. You've got to engage with the legislature, and it can be frustrating. I mean, I watch with the library bills, for example, dozens of librarians show up and provide thoughtful comments about how, the problems with the legislation, what libraries do, why the legislation was problematic. And it did not fall on deaf ears, but it didn't change the outcome of what happened. And I know that was very frustrating for them. In other words, they kind of had their day in court. They were able to have their say and they did a great job, but they still didn't get what they wanted. It felt very predetermined. And the testimony and evidence was overwhelming on the side of the librarians, and they still didn't get what they want. So it can be frustrating, but you have to keep engaging. DEI is it's an issue that is going to be a hyper focus of the legislature for a while now. I don't know how much longer, but in 2020, we started seeing DEI focused legislation. Everybody probably remembers in 2021, House Bill 377, that was the bill that said that schools couldn't teach that any race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin is superior or inferior, or that individuals are responsible for the actions committed in the past. Senate Bill 1176 in 2023, this appropriation placed restrictions on the appropriated funds for universities that they cannot be used to support DEI or social justice ideology. Senate Bill 1274 from this year prohibits post-secondary employers from requiring candidates to provide diversity statements. Also this year, there was a Senate concurrent resolution 134 that set up an interim committee, and that's where we're going to go here. It's an interim committee on DEI. And so let me just see. You can go, this is how, if you're interested in DEI and what the legislature is doing, one thing you can do is pay attention to this committee. You get here if you Google Idaho legislature, let me just kind of walk you out because we have a really great website. I think it's very easy to navigate. If you go to the Idaho legislature and you click on what comes up first, the Idaho legislature, this is what you'll get right here. And then to get to the DEI committee, you go here. You make sure that you go make a 2024 session, and we have it's a working group, actually, not an interim committee, but there's DEI. And this, you can see they just had a meeting, and you can even see what was presented. Now, I think this is fascinating, and I hope many of you will take a look at it. The committee asked Legislative Services Office, those are the full-time employees who provide us research, and we can ask them to look into this, that, or the other, and they do it for us. It's fantastic. So they were asked to take a look at a number of issues, and this is the slideshow that was provided, and I'm just going to kind of go through really quickly. They gave an overview of some legislation regarding DEI to kind of remind the committee members what the legislature had done. They talked about DEI nationwide, DEI legislation that's been enacted, some executive orders. Let me keep rolling through here. That's more legislation. They talked specifically about some of the bills, and this committee asked Legislative Services Office to go check with the universities and see if they're complying. They were worried that the universities were not complying with state law. And so this one, this one talks about hiring and admission decisions. They asked Legislative Services Office to go find out whether the institutions of higher learning had complied with our law that said you couldn't have a diversity statement requirement in your postings. Keep going. Oh, DEI in required courses. This was interesting. They went to each institution and said, hey, tell us about all the DEI courses, anything that may even have something to do with DEI, and tell us what you're teaching. And so the universities went and provided all these courses that could be interpreted as dealing with DEI. But I mean, they were just everyday courses that are taught, but language courses, sociology courses, but they've listed them. Some of the members of the committee are worried that that universities will start changing language that's used to describe courses so that they avoid being identified as diversity, equity, and inclusion courses, and the list goes on. It's a little creepy, frankly, because it feels very Big Brother. This committee in particular, that they are out to find, do a gotcha on the universities and punish. There's been an effort to remove funding. Boise State University, because they're in the capital and because Boise, frankly, is a fairly liberal city, they seem to get most of the heat. University of Idaho, then their president, I think, kind of got tired of it and pushed back a little bit. And then University of Idaho seemed to get some heat. ISU has managed to avoid a lot of that focus. But you just never know when it shows up. I don't, I'm pretty combative. So when I have educators, people at universities ask, well, what should we do? Should we keep our heads down? I just don't believe in that. I think you got to do your jobs. And yes, it may create problems. You may ruffle feathers. You may get in a little bit of trouble. I can't guarantee you can't. But I can guarantee if you're doing your job and you're doing what you believe is right, you'll be able to look yourself in the eye at the end of the day. And to me, that's more important. You can navigate the rest of the stuff, but being ashamed of how you did your job, that's something you can't recover from. Yeah, let me find that for you.
There was for our YouTube folks, there was a question from the audience about who was on the committee.
Members, here we go. These are the members. There's your co-chair, Senator Lakey, and Representative Boyle. There's a couple of really good members on here. Senator Wintrow, Senator Van Orden. I'll leave it at that.
Well, we are actually at a little bit over time, so we won't have questions for the panelists, but for those who are here, our panelists might be here for a few minutes after the panel and are in between. So if you do have questions, please feel free. And for those who are on the YouTube live stream, please don't hesitate to contact me directly with your questions, and I can direct those questions to our panelists. But would like to just I am very grateful for the five of you for being here tonight. You covered a ton of information, very complex sort of legal pieces in a short period of time. I learned a lot. And I think one of the things that I took most from this panel is, we have to be active advocates, but we have to educate ourselves always so we can be proactive and always prepare, know who our team is at our institutions, know who is responsible for what, and then taking it one step further is not just creating a team, but also making sure that all of our faculty, staff, and students know who that team is. So thank you all very much. Let's give them a round of applause. So we'll take a 10-minute break. We'll come back for our raffle and for our keynote speaker. So we've got coffee and snacks in the back, so please help yourself. to grab some coffee and snacks. We are going to end our evening with a big celebration, a raffle that we'll do first, and then I'll introduce our keynote and turn it over to her. So we have 3 raffle items, College of Education swag, really cool stuff. And what I have in here are, you have to be present to win, by the way. So I hope people are present. So our first raffle item, Elaine is helping me, nice. Fantastic. We didn't even practice that. It's our first ISU swag bag. And let's see, first person I pulled out was Nicole Staley. Nicole. So if you're a teacher, make sure you put that Benny on your desk because the Benny is way cool. It's kind of like a little stress Benny. Okay, this is another swag bag with some different stuff in it. And it goes to Dan V. Wong. And drum roll. Can you do a drum roll? No, you can't do. Oh, fantastic. This is a good audience right here. This is our big prize, our College of Ed backpack. And the winner is Caitlin Schwoop. Is Caitlin here? Fantastic. Great. Well, enjoy your ISU swag and thank you all for visiting. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you all for visiting our roundtables. I talked to many of our roundtable leaders and they had a wonderful time chatting with you. So at this time, I am thrilled to announce our keynote speaker, Dr. Selena Grace. Dr. Grace is the Executive Vice President for the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities, also known as NWCCU, where she's a powerhouse in supporting tribal colleges and minority-serving institutions. With her deep expertise in building DEI capacity, strategic planning, and policy reform, Dr. Grace brings a wealth of knowledge to her role as VP at NWCCU and for the regional institutions that NWCCU supports, such as ISU. Dr. Grace's career has spanned impactful roles, including Vice Provost at Idaho State University and Chief Academic Officer for the Idaho State Board of Education. She's been a trailblazer for transformational change in education, bridging diverse voices and leading initiatives that make a real and meaningful difference in our educational contexts. Dr. Grace's academic journey is equally as inspiring. As a first-generation college student, she earned a BA in English, an MFA in creative writing, and a PhD in public policy and administration. Her research and scholarly work, which you'll hear a little bit about tonight, is focused on American Indian representation in K-12 education settings. On a personal note, I have had the great pleasure and privilege of working with and learning from Dr. Grace. As an institutional leader, she has been an incredibly impactful mentor in my life. She's been a role model for change. And one of the things about Selena that I have always admired so greatly is she is consistently focused on always doing the right thing, even when that right thing is oftentimes complicated and very hard. So, Selena, I couldn't help but take that opportunity to thank you for that. You're a wonderful friend and have been an amazing guide in my professional life. So thank you. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Grace.
Thank you, Karen. I got to lower the mic. I have a little bit of a height deficit. Thank you for having me and staying. It's been a long afternoon, very inspiring and exciting to hear all of our speakers and share the information. So I'm going to start with a couple questions for all of you. So first, how many of you have walked into a room and looked around and nobody looked like you? Or nobody had had some of your lived experiences? How many of you have been judged by someone based on the way you look, the clothes you wear, their misperceptions of you. And finally, how many of you have judged someone based on your own perceptions or life experiences? So I ask because these moments and experiences create a feeling within each of us on whether we belong or whether we are outsiders within whatever we are doing. And these are all natural human tendencies. We don't do it in most cases to be mean-spirited. We just don't think. It's just part of our natural tendencies as humans. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes when I start to talk a little bit about my research. So I want to share a little bit about me to provide some context for you. There have been many times in my career where I've been in a room with high-level executives, political leaders, where I'm the only woman in the room. And it can be unnerving, right? You're coming from a different perspective and experience, and you know, and you have that feeling of being judged, of being questioned. I've often been the youngest in many meetings and experiences, and that too comes with a level of creating insecurity. Some of you may know me and know my story. Some of you may have made judgments about me the moment I walked up here on the stage. So, like many in this room, I am a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm a wife, I'm the mother of 4 children, ages 35, 30, 18, and 15. I have 2 daughters and 2 sons. When asked to share a fun fact about myself, I always share there are more years between my oldest daughter and my youngest son than my daughter and I. I can see some of you thinking, wait a minute, how old is she? I was 14 when I had my first child. I got married at 16. I had my second daughter at 19, and I was divorced when I was 22. I come from 4 generations of women who married at 16, who dropped out of school, and I really worked hard to change that trajectory for my own children. I didn't think I'd get emotional. This is kind of strange for me. So people always judged me. They had predisposed opinions about my success, about my abilities, simply because I was a teenage mom. Many teachers believed I should quit school and that I likely wouldn't amount to very much. Some teachers pushed me to do more. Some people were surprised by where I ended up in my life and my success. I have 3 degrees, as Karen mentioned. I owe my success personally and professionally to those degrees and the work it took to earn each of them. What I do know is what it feels like to be on the outside. And I believe it was because of the moments of inclusion and feeling like I belonged that helped me to persevere, that helped me to succeed in these educational endeavors. So, as we heard on our last panel, I'm probably going to use some words that are trigger words. Unfortunately, we live in a climate where words have been weaponized. And it's really disheartening. If you know me, you'll probably might call me a pot stirrer. As Karen mentioned, I'm not afraid to stand up and for what I believe is right. And I think we have to push back. These words have been weaponized. If we just look at the dictionary definition for diversity, it's a noun. Pretty harmless, right? It's the state or fact of being diverse. Difference, unlikeness, a diversity of opinion. What's so dangerous about diversity? Equity, also a noun. It's the quality of being fair or impartial. Don't we all want to be fair and do what's right? What about access? Also a noun. It's the ability, the right or permission to approach, to enter, to speak with or use, the state or quality of being approachable. How about inclusion? That's another word, noun, seems very harmless. It's the act of including. Why would we want to be exclusionary as a society, as a culture, as a community? And so as I talk about some of these, I'm going to talk about some of the theories that I used in my research. Those also are terms that unfortunately are being weaponized. But I feel like it's important to bring that up and to have those conversations. So when I began my research, I started with this question: is education the great equalizer? I believe, and still do believe, that education is the great equalizer in the US. It is something that is always yours and no one can take away. And most importantly, it opens doors personally and professionally. But I wondered if that was true for everyone. So I have a background, my undergraduate degree, I have a minor in Native American Studies. I am a fourth generation Idahoan. I grew up mostly here in Pocatello. So I understand the historical relationships between the community and the tribal community and how challenging it has been and continues off and on to be. And I have two grandchildren who are Shoshone-Bannock. And so I've always been very committed to the relationship with our tribal communities. When I worked at the state, I was part of the effort to restructure the Idaho Indian Education Committee to ensure that we had representation of the tribal education departments, of the tribal education leaders, in addition to the post-secondary institutions and the K-12 institutions. Representation matters. You heard it from the panelists today. It's important that those stakeholders have a voice and are represented in the discussion. When I was at ISU, I also worked with members of the Shoshone-Bannock tribe to update our MOU. And we have the tuition discount. While it's not as what we wanted it to be, it was better than what we had. And so these are all steps and efforts moving forward. I'm also the liaison to all 9 of the tribal colleges that we accredit. I feel very strongly about the roles, the purpose, the mission, and the history of our tribal colleges in those communities. And so that really drove a lot of my seeking of knowledge on whether or not education was truly the great equalizer. So I started with ultimately this research question, and it was, does the presence of American Indian teachers positively influence access and performance of American Indian students? 2 theories really framed my research. One was around social construction, and the other one was representative bureaucracy. A lot of times when you're doing research, you've got one primary theory or one theory and it frames it. But there wasn't really a way to separate the two, to really adequately address representative bureaucracy in the context of American Indian education, absent of looking at the social construction aspect of that. So what's interesting with social construction, so back to my earlier question, we all have these predisposed ways of assessing situations. It's innate in who we are as humans. Way back when, it was a survival mechanism. Not so much anymore, but it's how we assess whether or not someone is what we think they are or a situation is what we think it is. And so within a social construction theory, essentially what it is, and this is all of my work is from a public policy perspective. So from a public policy perspective, within social construction, you have policies that are developed based on those who are deserving and those who are undeserving. So policies are created around those, and it's, it's a 4-quadrant. And what's interesting is that where people fall within those categories changes over time. So for example, from an advantage category, the military can be in that category. But if you think back to the Vietnam era, the military were not in an advantage category. It didn't really shift back to that until 9/11. And so those things can change over time. And so you have, from a positive, you have those who are advantaged and dependents that are perceived in a positive light. So children, perhaps the homeless. And the negative category includes contenders, So they're a little bit of positive and a little bit of negative, big business, CEOs, unions, and deviants is the category. These are their terms, not mine. And those are like criminals, terrorists. And so you change over time. And then there's this mix somewhere in the middle where everyone falls. And so part of the reason in looking at social construction to frame this is because Native Americans as a population have oscillated in various categories from a policy perspective in various ways over the last 100 years. So what I did is I spent a lot of time looking at federal policy, looking at federal reports, and a lot of literature, and really trying to look at literature written by Native American authors, Native American researchers. And there were two themes that stood out in the literature. And those themes, what I often saw was the term the Indian problem. And really that was how was the federal government and how were the states going to manage American Indian policies around property, sovereignty, and education? But if you look at the literature, that term is used consistently. And the other one was that of deadliest enemies. And what's important there is the context of American Indian population and their relationship with states. And it's referred to as that of deadliest enemies because states wanted the land, right? The land that was the historical homelands of many tribes were moved, and the states wanted the land, they wanted the authority, the oversight, and American Indians operate in this quasi-sovereign status, and states didn't like that. And so those themes bleed throughout all of the literature, all of the research, all of the articles that are out there. And so you could see where American Indians fell. They always fell within those policy constraints within this category of undeserving and unentitled. What's also important to note is that education policy and politics were primary tools for assimilation and isolation from tribal culture and history. That fundamentally was so important because there's a lot of research related to representative bureaucracy out there with African Americans and Hispanic, which have a very different historical relationship with the US and the federal government. And so when you look at how educational policy or federal legislation is applied, education was a tool to destroy American Indian communities and culture and history. And so because of that relationship, they naturally have a level of distrust, suspect towards education. The other piece that I wanted to share is that within that framework, I looked at the historical status of American Indians over time, and again, where they fell, and then those three themes. And there are really three major federal reports that led into this. And really, there's 100 years of reports to look at and assess this relationship. And so that really framed the foundation that led into that application of representative bureaucracy. So why did Native Americans possibly have a different relationship towards education than, say, other demographics? So as I mentioned, representative bureaucracy, that was my primary theoretical framework. And really what it looks at is that it operates under this belief that public agencies represent the interests and values of those served. And those interests and values are then reflected in the policy decisions. And so the truest test of a representative bureaucracy is the extent to which, and this is important, their demographics mirror that of the communities that they serve. So with the research that already exists out there, school districts are a great place to look at the application of public policy, because states establish legislation and policy, and principals, superintendents, teachers have a good bit of autonomy in how they go about implementing it. And so, and they've got a lot of data. And so they collect performance data, enrollment data, demographic data. And so it's a great tool to look at to see, is this really a representative bureaucracy as you're assessing this application? And so as you look at representative bureaucracy, there's really two parts to it. And the first is, as it related to my research, was if you have American Indian teachers, that equated to what we call passive representation. They're there. If you had passive representation, i.e. the presence of American Indian teachers, then you should see the application of culturally relevant curriculum and teaching practices, which is really then active representation. And so those are two important parts, right? Can one happen absent of the other was really what we were trying to look at. So my research was a qualitative, cross-comparative case study of 2 rural Idaho public schools. And I looked at using descriptive statistics, and I did a number of interviews as part of this research. You know, part of my interest in this, it tied to my work at the state level, my work at Idaho State University, but I also felt like the prior research really failed to address the fact and the impacts of social construction, the political history of American Indians, and their relationship as it related towards education and educational policies, because of the way education was used towards American Indians across this country. So I looked at access and performance. When I talk about access, if you look at policy on representative bureaucracy, what they're talking about is academic grouping. And this is really important because when students are grouped into a category, often as troublemakers, as special ed or gifted and talented, when students are placed in categories, it's very hard for them to get out of those categories. Once they're placed in them, they're often kept in those categories over time. And so the research that was out there supported the fact that if there was a lack of representation, say with African-American teachers, Hispanic teachers, that those students often were grouped into disciplinary categories, special education. They weren't placed in gifted and talented or advanced opportunities. So I looked also at performance data. So I looked at attendance. I looked at the 4th and 8th grade ISAT. Were there disciplinary actions? 11th grade SAT, ACT participation, and graduation rates. And I looked at this data over a 3-year period. What was interesting is the research revealed that some outcomes had more to do with teacher availability or lack of availability, and frankly, a lack of resources than it did necessarily representation, right? The data was inconclusive because the resources just simply weren't there. A little bit about those 2 communities, because it's really important. Both communities had large percentage of American Indian representation, and both of the communities in the school district had a large percentage of Native American enrollment. So you can see within District 1, 40% of the community was American Indian. 47% of their student enrollment was American Indian. They had 0 Native American teachers, 0 administrators, and only 28% of the school board members were Native American. In District 2, larger percentage of the community was Native American, significantly larger percentage of the enrollment was Native American, but they also had Native American teachers, administrators, and school board members. So if you want to see the data, you'll have to look at the report because I only have a limited time. So these really are yes and no questions or yes and no statements, because really what I was looking at is, did the numbers represent that the presence of teachers positively impacted the performance or access elements within each of those districts? What's interesting with the 4th, 8th, and 11th grade special ed is you'll see in District 1, who had no Native American teachers, in 4th grade, they had a smaller percentage of their Native American students being placed in special ed than District 2, who had Native American teachers and administrators. However, when you got to the 8th and 12th grade levels, they had far more students, Native American students, being placed in special ed or remedial courses than did the district who had Native American teachers. And so perhaps they were placed in special ed programs or remedial courses programs early on, but they graduated them out of those faster. And so I think those pieces are important to look at the numbers. And really, this is just a summary of, did it reflect these things? Neither school had gifted and talented programs, which is true for a lot of our rural schools. They're underfunded, they're under-resourced, and so those students just don't have access to those services that they would get if they were in a larger district. Doesn't mean that the students didn't belong in gifted and talented programs, they just simply weren't available. As you know, the state has been really great about funding dual credit for a number of years. And within, it wasn't that District 1 didn't provide dual credit, but they had a smaller percentage of their Native American students participating in dual credit than did the district that had Native American teachers. So their participation in dual credit was higher. And neither of the schools had advanced math or science courses available to the students. Again, that was really not because they didn't want to offer it, they just didn't have the availability of qualified teachers. So looking at this, what it shows is that if you apply that theory, then the presence of American Indian teachers and administrators does positively impact access for Native students. So from a performance perspective, I looked at attendance, the ISAT, disciplinary actions, SAT, and graduation rates. The graduation rates piece I couldn't get to because the districts didn't track de-identified race and ethnicity data. And so there was no way to identify the graduation rates for any of their students, frankly, which was unfortunate. And as you can see, what's interesting here is the attendance piece. Both districts struggled with attendance significantly. And in fact, the second district was going through and implementing new policy requirements around attendance because they had lost about $70,000 because of attendance shortfalls in the way the state tracks attendance. And so trying to be a little harder and a little more focused on attendance. I think the other piece that I want to highlight is with regard to the ISAT category, it's that District 2, their Native American student population, they had a much higher percentage of their students at proficient or better. And so whereas District 1, who didn't have that representation, they had a higher percentage falling below proficient. I think that piece of knowing with talking is so much more valuable. That certainly the numbers tell a story, but there's so much underneath those stories, so much that you can't capture if you don't talk to people and you don't have some of those conversations. And so I did 18 interviews. I had 15 questions for superintendents and principals. I had 12 questions for the teachers and 10 questions for the tribal education departments, because that relationship, that interplay between the school, between the administration who's establishing the policies, the teachers who are implementing it, and were they working with the tribal education departments, was really an important part of the conversation. And so as it related to the principals and the superintendent, were they intentionally recruiting and retaining American Indian teachers? What efforts were they making in that regard? Were they aware and did they have active engagement in the use and development of culturally relevant pedagogy? Did they know what that was? Were they doing it? Could they give examples of it? From a curriculum perspective, how engaged were they with the tribal communities? In many instances, if they weren't engaged with the tribal communities, not only on the curriculum, but also in hiring, like how are they going about hiring teachers and developing paraprofessionals to be teachers, then there was really a big gap, and you could see that happening in those two districts. With teachers who are on the ground and working with students and so invested in supporting their students, I wanted to understand if they themselves understood the use of culturally relevant pedagogy, what were they doing around that? How could they apply it? And some examples of that. I also wanted to talk to them about academic grouping. Did they understand what happened when students were placed in remedial or special education? And what did they do to support them to grow out of those services? And then also what was really important is community engagement. So how engaged were teachers within the communities that they were working? Within the one district, that didn't have American Indian teachers, their teachers had to commute a long way to get to the town they lived in or the town they taught in. There just wasn't housing available. So they had other challenges, but many of those teachers did try and attend community events and be part of the community to support their students. With the tribal education directors, I wanted to understand what their perceptions were on the ability to influence policies that impacted members of their tribe and other Native American students they were serving. Also, what their perceptions were about academic grouping and what was happening to the students that they were providing resources and services to support. And also their perceptions of both the teachers and the administrators' investment within those communities. So, I mentioned this, education was weaponized, and that still continues to play out in the public school districts. As I mentioned, I work with the 9 tribal colleges that we accredit, and their mission is so important because they are working in culture and language preservation, and they are the hub of the community. And when you talk about belonging, those, the Native students who can attend a tribal college, who close to home and close to family, cultural events, community responsibilities, those students tend to be more successful, even when they go on and leave the tribal college, but they have that foundational support and experience. And they also have education that's coming from their community, not coming from people like me as an outsider. No matter how committed I am to that, I'm an outsider. And so the piece that's really important is that history and context matter at both the local level and the national level. And attendance was really complicated in these schools. Attendance wasn't just, well, students don't want to come to school, they don't trust. A lot of students didn't have a parent to take them to school, and there wasn't a bus. They weren't far enough out to ride the bus, and they weren't close enough to walk. Some older students were responsible for getting their younger siblings off to school because their parents worked. Some have food insecurity. They didn't have food. They couldn't get their clothes washed. They didn't have a washing machine. So the school was doing a lot of additional things to support the students. And so I think that when you think about working with rural communities, when you really have to understand, well, what are the challenges that those students are facing and how do you support them and meet them where they are? It wasn't that the students didn't want to go to school. And so the school actually needed to try different things than what they would normally do. And so I think that the other piece is both of those communities had a STEP grant. So that's a state tribal education partnership grant. Again, that gives some ownership and responsibility back to the tribal education departments to work with the public school system to support the education of their students. And so, at the heart of this, collaboration and partnerships really matter. They're critically important to working with both our tribal communities and even within our rural communities. Those things are really important. So I'm going to shift from my research, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my role, where I'm at the Northwest Commission. I was really glad that we got to see the DEI community slide and there was a reference to us. So I want to talk about that as well. But I want to share our vision of who we are as an organization. We want to be the premier accreditation agency whose member institutions foster access, belonging, and success for every student. When we talk about access, to us, it's that we believe every student who wants to go earn a couple credits, a certificate, a four-year degree, a graduate degree, that they should be given that opportunity. But it's not enough to give them access. All of the research shows that belonging matters, that once you get the students there, they have to feel like they're part of a community, that their voice matters, and that they're contributing to the well-being of the community and their participants in it. So you get them there, they feel like they belong. Now what? Now we care about their success. Now you have a duty and an obligation to ensure that they are successful in whatever their educational endeavors are going to be. And so if you look at a lot of the research, perceptions about being valued within a campus or school or community, do they have support from friends, from family? Those things all contribute to that aspect of belonging. As we look at who we are in our mission, how we assess institutions in meeting this requirement is by data and by evidence. We're not willy-nilly going around looking at people. We say, tell us what your mission is. So we accredit 163 institutions, faith-based institutions, public, private, for-profit, tribal colleges, health science, graduate programs. So we have a pretty broad portfolio of institutions. Our standards are broad enough that they allow each institution, based on their mission, the flexibility to meet the standards. And so we're assessing you based on your mission. What we tell you is you've got to disaggregate your data. You've got to look at race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, first generation status, and you need to look at persistence, completion, retention, graduation rates, post-graduation success, because you've brought these students in. You have an obligation and a responsibility to ensure their success, knowing that success does look different for each student. But we look at the data. And the one slide that referenced standard 1C6 is general education. So when you look at national reports, what do employers value most? Critical thinking, the ability to communicate and work with others. That's general education, right? That's what general education does. And general education, it gives students broad exposure to different ways of thinking, to different disciplines and the way different disciplines think. So that standard 1C6 that talked about all those things, that's general education. There's nothing ominous or sinister about it. We're not trying to indoctrinate anyone. We want everyone to be exposed to broad ways of knowing and thinking. And so I just had to share that piece. So I want to share also, as educators, you have the most important jobs of all. Don't be afraid. No matter what's circling around you, there's always light ahead and someone to believe in, someone to encourage, and someone to support in their journey. That you'll never know when you make a difference in someone's life. Someone who might have given up, not believed that they could have, should have, or belonged if you don't try. We can only see a short distance ahead, but we can see plenty there that needs to be done. So I want to thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions. I don't normally just stand up and talk. I like to be interrupted and ask questions. So if there are questions that folks would like to ask me, I'm happy to answer them. And questions about anything, if you know me, I'm fair game. I'll tell you what I think.
Testing. There it is. There it is. So we'll start with questions in person. Yeah, please set your crutches.
My question's slightly about the Native American population, but I come from a family where my aunt was not Native American, but she was a grandmother at 32 and a great grandmother at 51. So have you thought about within the Native American population, how young motherhood may affect those students as well?
So it wasn't part of any of my research. I think that's true. I mean, I think about my own experience, my own journey. I'm a grandmother, but I'm not a great grandmother yet. My mother is a great grandmother, much to her dismay. But I think that it's different than that within the Native American communities because they have a community responsibility. They have a responsibility to family, and it's impossible to lump them all together. Each tribal community comes from a unique cultural perspective. The Crow are different than the Cheyenne. The Cheyenne are different than the Salish Kootenai, than the Shoshone Bannock. And so when you start saying, well, all Native communities, this applies to them, it's just simply not true. And so there are cultural norms within each of those communities, cultural responsibilities. Some are matriarchal, some are patriarchal. And so those aspects factor into there, but it wasn't part of any of my research.
Hi, I'm superintendent of a small district in American Falls, and just curious if you have any ideas on how to help recruit or encourage Native Americans to become teachers.
Well, I think you have to start by talking to them. I think you've got to reach out to those communities. I think where the many of our Native communities or Native American students, they're what's the term I recently heard? Place committed. They're not place bound, but they're committed to home and to that place. And so they don't want to leave. And so getting them to stay and support the communities. But if there's no one that looks like them, it's hard to believe that they can pursue those paths. And I think that that's where engagement with the tribal communities, the tribal education departments within the surrounding areas, I think that that's really important. That's an important first step in those conversations, is reaching out to the tribal education departments and say, hey, I value your perspective and let's have some of these conversations. I think it's really important.
Hi, Selena. Welcome back. I'm really interested in your research, so thank you for sharing that. On one of your slides, one of the findings that you had is you explained that education had been weaponized. I wonder if you might go into a little bit more detail about that.
Sure. So if you don't know, there's a whole era of boarding schools where we took Native American students from their families and we cut their hair. We told them you can't speak your language. We punished them. Many students died. And I won't say that it was true for all Native students, right? Some families wanted their students to go to the boarding schools to learn the American way, that they felt like they'd be more successful. But fundamentally, education's purpose within the Native American population was to destroy each of those unique individual communities and culture, to take away language, and to assimilate them. And so that, and the interesting piece is, right, our Native American population, they've been here since time immemorial. And, you know, we brought in African Americans, we brought in the Hispanic, some of the Hispanic population. There's some ties there, of course, to Native communities as well. But they have a long history within this land, this landscape. And we came in and said, nope, you can't, it's not going to happen. And so that's that distrust. That's that, wait, I don't trust what you're doing because I know what you've done. And so when you re-empower the tribal communities with education, you know, with tribal colleges and universities, when you partner with tribal education departments, you're re-empowering them for their own, you know, to take ownership in their education.
Mine is a question of curiosity. I know that some of my cultural beliefs and where I come from is similar to how the tribal population live. And when people want to study or do something with us, we always feel like, what is there for them? Why are they studying us? So I want to know, what did you do to be able to gain their trust? I know you said you were an outsider, and then you said you value them, or you value, but what are some of the strategies that made them feel like you belong with them? Because if you don't belong, it's hard to do research.
I do think that that's challenging, right? To be an outsider and come in and say, hey, I've got this great research, I'm going to help you. I had a long working relationship with the 5 tribes of Idaho from my work at the state level. So that was really like, they knew me. They trusted that I have no ulterior motives. Before I did anything with the research, I met with them. You know, are you concerned about this? Is there anything that I've misrepresented? They were really my first contact. I mean, certainly I had to get approval from the state to get the data, to work with the school district superintendent. But my responsibility is really to the tribal communities. And so working with them, that was part of it. And I think that it took a long time to build those relationships and that trust. I mean, I've been at the commission now for almost 5 years, and I've been the liaison to all 9 of our tribal colleges since then, but it's still a work in process. They trust me, but they're suspect of me still, right? I don't have that same relationship. I mean, rightfully so, that I had in working with the 5 tribes of Idaho that I did when I was at the state level. So it really is first and foremost about building relationships. And you should go to them about what do they need. And these were things that I had seen at the state level. And so I had conversations with them before I began the research, because if there wasn't an interest in it, I wasn't going to do it. Even if I thought, well, this is great, this is interesting, this is helpful, this could maybe guide some things forward. If they weren't supportive of it, there was no point in moving forward.
Selena, I have a question for you. And this is sort of dovetailed with Superintendent Jensen's question about recruiting Native American teachers. So if we can't recruit Native American teachers, how can teachers, both K-12 and higher ed, create and learn how to create more culturally relevant pedagogies, even if we're not Native American, to ensure that we are increasing that feeling or sense of belonging for really all of our students?
Yeah, a great question. Ask, right? Start having conversations with those tribal education departments, with their educational leaders. Reach out to them. And there are a lot of great resources actually in the state, and a lot of great programs happening across the state, focused on our Native population and supporting them. And so become part of the community. Go to community events. Understand where they live, what their challenges are, what their life is like, day to day. If you don't know and see it, how can you possibly begin to understand it? And so being part of the community is really important. So not just reaching out and going, yeah, give me this information, but engage with those local communities where those students are being served, I think is also really important. Build relationships. It's very much a relationship. The relationships are what makes it important. And I think that's true for all of us as humans, right? At the end of the day, who we know and what we do, and the more we get to know each other on a personal level, even if we think differently, we go, that's just Karen. She thinks different, but she's such a good person. She really cares. Like maybe we don't share the same political beliefs or spiritual beliefs, but I know her intent is true. And so I think those are the pieces that where we've gone so far astray.
Any other questions for Dr. Grace?
So I work in the Fort Hall in Fort Hall, and I just have a question. So how would I, as an educator, get the community or even high school students to even start looking into college and becoming an educator themselves?
So Fort Hall has a tribal education department. They've got some great leaders out there. You know, this is a tough one because I really feel very strongly in the value of our tribal colleges and universities because they bring in all ages. And for cultural things, for language opportunities. And so when a community doesn't have that, I think it's harder to always engage the older population in that. But I think if you work with those tribal education departments for like the community and culture groups or their cultural language preservation groups, I think those are opportunities in which they're working with the elders and older community members that you can likely engage them in those opportunities. But I think the more you partner with them in those conversations, the stronger the likelihood is you'll get greater engagement. It's the end of the day. Like literally, it's the end of the day. It's dark.
Well, Dr. Grace, thank you so much for your keynote. That was fantastic. While we are at the end of the day, I'm full of lots of excitement and ideas. So thank you for that. And again, thank you to all of our panelists. To wrap up the evening, I would like to turn it over to Dean Natuli. So Dean Natuli, come on forward.
Thank you so much. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to our esteemed panelists. Yes, Senator Rakti and your team. Want to say thank you. Monahan and the first team at 3 p.m. Want to say thank you. And our esteemed keynote speaker, Dr. Grace, want to say thank you for facilitating a thoughtful and enriching exploration of critical issues surrounding belonging, equity, and inclusion. Their contributions have allowed us to engage in meaningful internal dialogue. I know we didn't have a lot of dialogue on the tables, but inner dialogue really happened today. And as we go out, we're going to exchange ideas and reaffirm our collective responsibility to serve as advocates for positive change within our schools, university, and broader community. It is my hope that today's discussions have provided valuable insights on fostering a strong sense of belonging in both educational and professional settings, as well as strategies for navigating legal considerations related to BEI in learning environments. Drawing on Dr. Grace's presentation, I wish to leave you with a reflective question, which my son at home was like, when she saw the title, she said, "Mom, isn't that an existential question?" I said, "I don't know what that means, but I want to leave you with this question. When no one looks like me, what must I do to support access, belonging, and inclusion?" In addition, it is crucial that we translate our conversations into concrete actions that ensure every student at ISU, as well as those in schools where our students and graduates work, has an equal opportunity to succeed. Achieving this requires not only an understanding of the distinct challenges faced by individual students and populations, but also a commitment to providing the necessary support to overcome those barriers. It demands steadfast dedication to advancing BEI in all aspects of our work. Finally, I would like to extend my appreciation to all who contributed to this event. Thank you to those who shared valuable resources. I think some of them are still here, that promoted access both on our campus and within the community of Pocatello. To our police, they were here. I took some of the things. I didn't even know that there's something called Raven, Guardian. I learned it today. So to our police and public safety team, if they are watching online, we are grateful for your efforts in ensuring our safety. Finally, I want to say thank you once again to our planning committee for their tireless dedication. Yes, Mr. Sheldon Harris, I see you. For ensuring our technology operates smoothly today. Obi Moon, I see her with a camera. Tabitha Butler, I don't know where you were when I said welcome in the afternoon. And Atlanta Branson, for marketing this event. I know we may not look like we are many tonight, but believe me, they are online and they shall keep on watching our YouTube. So thank you for marketing. And Laura is not here today. She went somewhere, our office manager, for coordinating the many details that brought this event together. And Ms. Monahan, again, and Dr. Appleby, for moderating these two wonderful panels. And special thanks to Dr. Appleby for facilitating the conference and for your work in developing professional development credits, opportunities for this, for those who want to pursue BEI, they're going to be talking to Dr. Appleby. I want to say thank you. And again, thank you for staying this late, learning about BEI so that we improve our relations and also foster belonging in our communities. Thank you. Thank you.